Now, the Buckeye Extra podcast with Rob Oller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Welcome back to the Buckeye Extra football podcast. This is Joey Kaufman. I'm joined by Bill Rabinowitz and Rob Oller, here to talk about Ohio State's 13-10 loss to Michigan on Saturday, their fourth straight defeat in the rivalry. Really an inexplicable loss that for the first time Ryan Day in his tenure, they lost to an unranked team. And not only is it a setback in the rivalry, but it also keeps them out of the Big Ten championship game. And unlike in past years, I don't think anybody saw this coming, but this is the post-mortem of that fourth straight loss to Michigan and where the Buckeyes go from here.
It was a stunning loss. I don't think anyone foresaw it. Although I will say that if you were to say, what's the formula for Michigan to pull off an upset, it was this to a T, where Ohio State makes self-destructs at key times. Two interceptions by Will Howard were devastating. The two missed field goals by Jaden Fielding were devastating. The head-scratching decision to keep running the ball into the teeth of Michigan's front was maybe more maddening, because that was the one area where you knew that was where Michigan had the edge. Was their defensive tackles, Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, their front seven in general, but really those two were going to be a tough task for Ohio State's interior of the offensive line because of the injuries and the inexperience. And that's exactly what happened. Ohio State has no one to blame for this but themselves. Michigan didn't do much offensively. Davis Warren threw for, I think, 63 yards, threw two picks of his own, two great plays by Caleb Downs and Jack Sawyer. The defense did its part until the end. How many times have we heard that? Defense was great until it had to be. And all that added up to this shocking loss.
Yeah, it was a debacle. I mean, it's plain and simple. It was a debacle. And, no one saw this coming, but not to pat myself on the back, but I will, of course. In talking on other podcasts with them, I had a podcast last week with a Michigan man, and we agreed that if somehow the game is close, he said at halftime, I said the fourth quarter, but I said if the game's even anywhere close, a one-score game in the fourth quarter, look out, because the puckering is going to begin, and it absolutely did. And I think probably no better example of that was the 12 men on the field, the penalty late, 3rd and 2, that was costly in terms of time, where Ryan Day actually said there was panic on the sidelines. That is not a good soundbite, by the way, and it's being used against him, and the whole thing of you admit that there was panic in a situation that really didn't need to be panic. But I think they tightened up, and we'll get into this, that, Michigan is absolutely in Ryan Day's head and in Ohio State's head. And that's really what it came down to. For whatever reason, and who knows the ingredients, who knows how the wiring works and stuff like this, like it happened with John Cooper also. But in this particular game, Bill said it, just a total jaw dropper that they kept trying to run into the teeth of Michigan's strength. You have two NFL quality defensive linemen, and they just ran right at him. It was almost like we started to believe our own headlines and the narrative of we've got to out-tough these guys. I think it's 22 or 23 straight years where the team with the most rushing yards wins the game. And it's almost like, and I think Joey either wrote a story about this or was going to about analytics. It's almost like they deferred to analytics, and we're not going to win this game if we don't run the ball and win the running contest. It's just inexplicable to me.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I wrote, I guess, about that, but I do agree with your point, Rob, about the stubbornness, if you will, about Ohio State wanting to run the ball, and they were clearly not effective doing it at all. Just some numbers to keep in mind, but Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins had 22 carries in this game. 9 of those went for no yards or a loss of yards, which to me is totally on the offensive line in those situations to not be able to get any sort of push off the ball. And for the game, they averaged only 3 yards per carry, just could not really do anything on the ground at all, and they stuck with it. And Ohio State's been this methodical team all season. They have not been what many people remember Chip Kelly doing in Oregon or even to some degree at UCLA last year, where they were going to push the tempo, go no huddle. I wrote about that a couple of weeks ago about how their pace has been the slowest at any point in Ryan Day's tenure, and both Day and Kelly put that on the fact that there's now the helmet communication in college football. You can talk with the quarterback in the huddle and be very efficient and all that. But their best drive of the game was when they went hurry up at the end and late in the second quarter, where they were not huddling between plays. They had to go fast. They had to push the ball on the perimeter, and Michigan couldn't cover Jeremiah Smith. That was clear at several instances. You can go back to the first drive where they tackled him in the end zone. He drew 2 pass interference penalties, but that was not the way they played in the second half, and they were shut out. The last 2 times they played Michigan and Columbus, they scored a total of 3 points in the second half. None this week. 3 in 22, which is just, I think, the remarkable thing about the way this rivalry has gone. And Ohio State has been a third quarter team this year, but man, that did not at all materialize.
Bill deserves to coach the team because he kept saying, just keep throw it.
No need. Yeah. Don't outsmart yourself. We were saying in the press box, why are they running?
Yeah, it was there. I mean, we're not geniuses. I think the whole Buckeye Nation was saying the same thing. This isn't working. And Joey, I forgot that stat. I knew they were shut out in this game, the second half, but what, 3 points? You're saying what last year?
3 points in 22
with CJ Stroud.
Still, I mean, that's coaching, guys. I hate to say that's coaching.
Well, they didn't have.
It's halftime adjustments. Right. It's whatever motivational mumbo jumbo you're going to give in the locker room. You've got to give it. It's just, it's an indictment.
I will say
it's an indictment on the coaching staff.
The second half certainly had an inauspicious start when Travion Henderson fielded that kickoff and then let it bounce. Then scooped it up, and they started the second half with the ball at the 6-yard line.
Yeah,
that did them no favors. I mean, and that's something that I think the special teams has improved, but they have not really maximized kickoff returns in any fashion. They've sometimes returned the ball and haven't gotten to the 25. They would just almost more often than not be better off for catching it. But nonetheless, it never felt like they could get going on the right foot when even the second half began.
And not only that, well, they didn't have a first down for the last essentially 21 minutes of the game. Yeah. That's no first downs in the fourth quarter. I think the last one was with just under 6 minutes to go in the third quarter. And you mentioned Travion not being able to field the kickoff. It wasn't just that. Caleb Downs didn't catch a punt that rolled for 68 yards, and Ohio State had to punt on their possession. That went like 31 yards, so that's a net of 37 yards that Michigan got. In a game like this where yards were at a premium, that stuff matters. You can't really fault the defense too much. The one play that you can really fault them for is they had Khalil Mullings hemmed in on that 3rd and 6, and he broke free for 27 yards, and that was the game. Once they were in field goal range, because their kicker made a 54-yard field goal instead of missing 38 and 34-yarders. So you knew that once they were in field goal range, they're going to bleed the clock and leave Ohio State as little time as possible. And not that it probably mattered. Ohio State couldn't move the ball anyway. It was just everything that could possibly go wrong in that game went wrong. Special teams, offense. Again, the defense played well, but, Michigan's offense isn't very good, especially without Holston Loveland. He's their best receiver.
Here's my question, Bill. I think you have to ask why. Like everything that could go wrong went wrong, and you can say that about a lot of things. Like, oh man, it was that, and we need to be careful to not make that sound like it was just bad breaks. And oh well, everything that could go wrong went wrong for a reason. And what's the reason? And part of this is, as it was in the Cooper era, when the first thing goes wrong, I hate to use the airplane analogy of when things go bad in an airplane. It's one thing leads to another thing leads to another thing, and in this situation, the oh no factor. One thing goes wrong, it's oh no, here we go again, and then it just caves in, and that's we'll get into this, but that's the issue they really have to look at with the coaching staff and with coaching is like, how do you break that pattern of the oh no? And you can say, well, the breaks even out. Well, yeah, eventually, but how bad does it have to get?
Yeah, you
That
felt
first
the mystique
interception.
of Michigan building after the aura that Michigan had just continued to build as the game wore on.
Right.
I think from the first thing was Will Howard's pick. It might as well have been a pick six. Return it to the two. As soon as that happened, you thought, oh boy. Because the first drive, Michigan gets one first down, Ohio State forces a punt. Ohio State goes down the field. They had to settle for a field goal, which you think, okay, they got a field goal. They stop them again. Ohio State gets the ball, and Howard throws that pick. That was, I don't know where he was throwing it. He threw it inside, and he had to throw it outside. And you can't give a team like Michigan a gift touchdown. It's the only touchdown they scored. And as soon as that happened, you thought, okay, at the very least, we got a game. At least we got a game for a while. And that was the last thing that Ohio State wanted. Ohio State wanted to just assert itself and say, not this year. This is our stacked roster. That everyone came back for this game. You guys suck. We're going to just put it to you right from the start. And they were on that path until that interception. And that's just when you could almost feel the whole stadium go, oh no, here we go again. Here we go again, like you said, Rob. And that's what happened.
Yeah, it's almost inexplicable, other than it becomes a mental game. It gets inside the head, and we don't know. No one knows except those in that locker room and those in the Woody Hayes facility, like what's really going on. And nothing may be wrong. It's all comparative stuff. Okay, Urban Meyer was 7-0 versus him. Well, there's some extenuating circumstances. The first three games, when he was 3-0, it was against Brady Hoke and terrible, terrible Michigan teams. Well, but although this was a terrible, quote, terrible Michigan team. So that's why this one is especially bad. But what did Urban Meyer do right that Ryan Day is not doing right? These are, it can be minuscule stuff. It can be attitude stuff. It can be who your assistant coaches are. We even got into Chip Kelly, super high paid, and he's calling this game. Ryan Day's taking all the heat, or a lot of the heat, and Chip Kelly is, I think we all mentioned at least Chip Kelly just to kind of make him accountable for this. It's just, I don't know what happened there. I don't know if, here's what happens, guys, when something like this happens. Then everything gets on the table of speculation. And did Ryan Day really not want that? But he's not going to tell Chip Kelly we can't do that in the midst of the game? Probably not. But these questions rise to the surface of did their friendship get in the way of the right play calling? It's speculative, but when you lose inexplicably, everything, you start looking under that, you lift up that rug to see what's under there, and who knows what's under there.
Yeah. There was one play, it was 4th and 7, I believe, when Ohio State was about at the 40, and he punted. And I was surprised he punted. It was before they really got bogged down. It was clear that they were not going to be able to run the ball. It was at a point in the game where I thought they could get 7 yards. It ended up being a very good punt. It was the one good special teams play they made. They downed it at the 2. And that's the one that set up, I believe, Caleb Downs' interception. So it didn't really hurt them, but it was more of a mindset thing. Like, look, you're punting on 4th and 7 from the 40, which I think the analytics people would tell you is a bad idea. It wasn't as egregious as what happened last year before halftime. Not even close. But I just thought, if you want to go for the jugular mentality, you go for it there. Because Michigan's offense was as advertised. They have Caleb Mullings is a very good running back. He gets those extra yards because he fights and leans forward, and he's really good. The offensive line is average, I would say, and the receivers are below average. I will say the one play that I think it was a tight end made on the sideline, making that catch on Davis Warren's throw. That was a hell of a play by Michigan. So Michigan did make some plays. Give them some credit. But geez, overall, I mean, it kind of felt like Ohio State was playing with one arm tied behind its back. Like, why don't you just throw the ball and just do what you do best and be done with it?
I wonder, too, how much Will Howard's. I mean, the one thing that was in some ways out of their control, other than just, I think, execution or game plan and all that, was the Will Howard hit in the second quarter,
Right.
where he's running for a first down, takes a tough hit, comes out of the game for a play. He said later that he was evaluated for a head injury, but took him a while to really get re-engaged. It felt like his first three passes after that were incomplete. He did look good on the last drive of the second quarter, but you just wonder if he was at full strength or how that affected him. He said he was clear to return. The doctors had cleared him. Ryan Day said that as well, but it certainly was not his best game in terms of decision making either. I think the game plan was kind of goofy in and of itself. How run heavy they were at times, running the ball on third down at times. But even when they did pass the ball, there were just mistakes made. There was one of Will Howard's, the second interception came when Ohio State was in field goal territory and tries to thread a pass to Emeka Egbuka between defenders, which felt like a situation where you got to know you at least have a chance to attempt a field goal in that spot if you don't get the first round. Granted, Jaden Feely might have missed that field goal anyway, and it's a moot point, but that was a situation where the decision-making was just not at its peak, and he just seemed off to me. I mean, you think about the way Ohio State played against Indiana, was very loose. They're winning the game, and he's doing the dig at Kurt Signetti. Just the way they're feeling themselves. They felt tight against Michigan.
He played tight. The game got to him. The game was too big for him. I gotta believe that the head injury did not play into it. I want to believe that, because to send a guy back out who's like woozy and not 100% is A, not good for the player, and B, shame on you for putting a guy out there who's not 100%, and which goes into the whole, well, what else we got? Well, we got Devin Brown, and we got guys that we haven't seen because you kept your quarterback in late in games, so they weren't ready to come in and be backups. So shame on the coaching staff if the head injury at all had anything to do with it. He should not have been playing. He should not have been in there. And I got to tell you, he's a great guy, great quote for us, and, showed a lot of moxie, as they say, all season. But he didn't in this game. And to me, their last series, it's like he didn't come close to completing. They were throwing balls like, what was the early one to Carnell Tate? Like, he was already out of bounds almost, and the pass went there. And then in the last series, the same thing. They ran these sideline throws. I mean, the middle was open. Bill was calling it all day, like it's there, and they just didn't do it. They kept throwing these late sideline passes, and on the last series, they were just sailing like into hands of, ball boys on the sideline. It was embarrassing, the last series.
I don't remember Carnell Tate dropping a ball all year until Saturday, when the next to last possession, it would have been a first down. First down, they would have gotten, probably the 35-yard line. You get some momentum going. There was plenty of time at that point, and it was a good throw. He just dropped it, and so it's like, okay, if Carnell Tate is dropping balls, then there was enough blame to go around. I'm sure almost every senior on that team can point to a play that he made or didn't make and say, oh, I'll live with that one. I mean, Travion with the kickoff return, I don't blame him at all for his inability to run the ball, because there was nothing there. That's not on Travion Henderson. But, Denzel Burke had a pass interference call on the touchdown, on the game-winning field goal drive. You can go down the list of guys who just didn't make the plays. And again, this is not to rip them. Look, they feel as bad as Ohio State fans feel. It's, Ohio State players and coaches feel 1,000 times worse. They're the ones who put in the work and put in the effort and gear their whole year toward this game. So I hope there's a little bit of empathy toward these players. They didn't try to lose. They wanted to win more than you did. And so, nobody feels worse than the people in the Woody. And so I don't think it's helpful to have, look, this fan base can be unforgiving and it can be over the top. And I think we would agree that given the success that this program's had over the last, since Urban Meyer certainly got there, it's a spoiled fan base. I mean, it is, because I mean, any fan base would get spoiled by the success that Ohio State's had. But, they were trying to win this game. It may not look like it at times, but they were trying to win the game. And so I don't know how helpful it is to for fans to just go off on these guys. I mean, they already feel bad enough.
Bill, that's part of the deal is they're getting paid now.
Well, no question. No question.
A long time ago that
I get it.
This is more semi-pro, and these guys, they're 18-year-old kids. That doesn't wash anymore. It's still true. They are still 18-year-old kids, but the narrative's changed on that.
It has, but it doesn't change basic fundamental decency and just kind of like or just respect. You could be critical. Look, we've been critical. That's fine. But to kind of go over the top and to personally text or on social media personally go after these guys, I mean, just as a human being, you shouldn't do it.
I hate to say it's the new normal, and it shouldn't.
Well, it is the new normal. That's a whole other topic.
I mean, I think that's why we're seeing even what happened. We can transition into the post game here and stuff. Sure. I think that's why you're seeing at Ohio State, flags trying to be planted and a melee. You're seeing in, I think, North Carolina State and North Carolina had some fisticuffs and stuff. You had Florida and Florida State tried to do that. And I think in the age of social media, it's just like there's just I don't even know what you would call it. It's like anything goes. It's just like flash.
Nothing's out of bounds anymore.
Everything's a flashpoint. Like you just think it, you do it. There's just no, well, maybe I shouldn't do this. It's just social media is just raw, and I think it's filtered into just society. We don't need to get into some kind of, cultural thing here necessarily, but the post game was wild, and I know the frustration that was there. But and Michigan started it. Let's call it like it is. Michigan started it by trying to, plant the M flag in the middle, and you guys take it away if you want to jump in on this. But you're singing Carmen, Ohio. We're about to sing Carmen, Ohio. Everyone's lined up, and then you turn around and you see that, and then half the team goes running to midfield to try to stop it, and Jack Sawyer grabs the flag, and then someone else grabbed the flag, and a Michigan person finally ended up. It was like capture the flag. Remember the game Capture the Flag? It's playing out in real time after the game.
I was in the press box. I just finished writing, and I saw, I'm on deadline, so I can't really pay a lot of attention, but I can't help but see that. Look, if you plant a flag in the middle of the opposing teams, you're going to get a reaction. I mean, what is Ohio State supposed to do? Say, oh, okay, they won so they can do whatever they want. Of course they're going to respond. Now, that doesn't mean that you get into, starts throwing punches, but it would be more kind of unnatural if you just kind of didn't do anything. Again, it got out of control, and the whole pepper spray stuff, that's a whole other issue. But the fact that Ohio State wouldn't just accept that happening, I think it's like at hockey when somebody runs your goaltender or something and you don't retaliate or defend them. I mean, it's, F-A-F-O, right? I mean, there's a little bit of that. You know what that stands for, Rob.
My feeling on it was just it added to the ugliness of the day. It was
no question.
I mean, it was an ugly scene because to me, this was, I think, of all the 4 losses they've had to Michigan, this was the ugliest. This was the worst first time losing to an unranked Michigan team since '93. Other ones could have been explained away as the product of Michigan being good. This was a bad rebuilding team. We talked about it all week. Ohio State was a 3-touchdown favorite, and you lose to them at home, and then you can't get off the field and in just a normal fashion where you sing Carmen, Ohio and go through the motions of that. But your players end up being pepper sprayed while you're trying to break up Michigan playing a flag at midfield. I mean, it just adds to the overall ugliness and I think embarrassment that a lot of Ohio State fans and certainly the players and the coaches themselves feel.
This really knocked the legs out of the Connor Stallions thing too. If you really think about it, I mean, you could, and I think Bill had this in his analysis. You could, if you so chose to look at it this way, the previous couple, at least 21,
22.
Yeah, you could say, well, Michigan cheated. Connor Stallions was stealing signs, blah, blah, blah. And I think there's something to that. Maybe not the actual stealing of the signs, but the confidence that it gave Michigan. But there was no Connor Stallions here.
No.
And so it kind of dilutes the 21 and 22 argument, even though it's a somewhat fair argument. It dilutes that, and it just is just laid bare. This laid bare that Michigan is in their head, just as Ohio State was in Michigan's head for most of the 2000s. And Ryan Day, let's move on to that if we can, unless there's probably more to cover. But he did not look as ashen or as washed out as he has in some other losses. I think he was more he looked like deer in headlights post game. He just he couldn't believe it still. Even when he came into the press room for the interview, it wasn't like it's like it still hadn't happened. It was still surreal to him, whereas other losses, he was just down because he knew, okay, that one hurt, whatever. This was like, did that just happen?
I think we're all like that. I mean, I woke up Sunday morning.
He's the head coach.
I know. I woke up Sunday morning. I thought, that did. I mean, that wasn't, that was real. And look, I mean, a win, as we expected, would have been such a help in terms of changing the narrative of, I mean, the one knock on him, one and a half or two knocks, Michigan, and then the difficulty in winning against the very best teams. Other than that, he's been close to perfect, but Mrs. Lincoln, other than the play, other than it's like that. So a win, as we all expected, would have said, okay, you got this win, you got the monkey off your back, you go play for the Big Ten championship. You don't have to win the national championship. You obviously everyone wants to, but the season won't be a failure if you don't win the national championship. Now it will be, and so you have to regroup. You've got all these seniors who came back with Michigan being the number one goal now have to train themselves, resummon the enthusiasm to go have to win 4 games now, not just 3, but 4 games to win a national championship. Can they do it? Look, they're as talented as any team in the country. They can do it. Will they? I'm a lot less optimistic now than I was before Saturday at noon.
The good news is they wouldn't have to play Michigan in the playoff.
They will not. Although, it's good and bad. I mean, I think in 22, that was part of the motivation against Georgia was the chance to have another crack at Michigan if they were to win. Of course, both of them lost. But, there's no chance of that this year.
They don't have the emotional baggage if they're playing Tennessee or Oregon or
right, so maybe they'll be good.
Notre Dame. They do against Michigan. And even Day's record in big games and all that, it's 4-6 against top 5 teams.
And how many of those were Michigan?
That's
3 of them were Michigan, right?
That's spitting distance from 500. And I would take it most teams would want 500 in top 5 games, I think is pretty adequate. Like you can't expect to win every top 5 game you play. So I think they got more than a puncher's chance in a playoff because you remove the mental hurdle of getting over Michigan. The defense, I think, played well Saturday. The larger issue, I think, for them is just what's the state of this team?
Right, psychologically.
Can you regroup? If they play a home playoff game, do the fans in the stadium want them to win the game? Or are they going to boo because they want Ryan Day gone? I mean, I'm serious.
Oh, that's a fair question. I know people that came up to me yesterday. Church. I mean, he didn't even have the church crowd behind him. And they're like, well, I tell you what should happen. They should fire him right now. I mean, this is just how fans think. It's just ludicrous, but I'm telling you, it's not just 1 or 2 people think this. Bring Urban Meyer in for the playoff. I am not kidding you. Bring Urban Meyer, and people may be nodding in agreement who are listening to this, honestly. Bring Urban Meyer in for the playoff, and then, then find a coach. It's crazy. There are people, I read another thing where they hope that they don't win a national championship so that they get rid of Ryan Day. And I'm telling you, that's not one or two people. It's out there.
It's bizarre in a sense because it'd be like you have the NFL playoffs and the Buffalo Bills were to lose to the Miami Dolphins in December, but they still have the playoff to play. You don't fire the coach or go ballistic because you lose a December game to your rival in the NFL. The game is now the Ohio State Michigan rivalry is now really in a lot of ways separate from the national championship picture. You have
a one-game season.
It's a one game season. It's in terms of the approval rating of the coach might be as important as anything in sort of the all politics is local thing. If you win that game, that can keep the people off your back in a way. But if the ultimate prize is what you pursue, it doesn't just have the effect it did in 1970, which I think is just a different frame of mind that people are still wrapping their mind around, because to me, the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry mattered so much for so many years because you had to win that game to win a national championship and to win the Big Ten. And this year it did cost them the Big Ten, but it didn't cost them a shot at a national championship. And that's going to be, I think, different moving forward.
I've said.
Let me just say this. Let's say real quick. You've got 3 weeks to heal?
Yeah.
You actually,
that helps.
If you want to spin it positive, you've got extra time to heal. Now you have, it's almost like, bowl prep. You have 3 weeks to fix what went wrong, whether it's Hinsman's snaps, that went off his rear end. And
they were slow all game.
Right. So they can fix that or try to fix that. Anyhow, that's the spinning it positive. But Bill, what do you got?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I've posed this question on this podcast before, or at least the mention this, that I think there are Ohio State fans that would rather not win a national championship and beat Michigan than beat Michigan and not win the national championship, which is crazy. I mean, you would never find a Browns fan saying I'd rather beat the Steelers than win the Super Bowl. I mean,
but that is the difference.
I get it.
But that's also what makes college football great. That's what sets it up.
No,
I don't want it to be. Who wants to be more like the NFL? It's out of control, ludicrous, and crazy, but it's college football. So in a way, I don't mind it. And in terms of Ryan Day, I've been stewing on this since the game, and I don't even know what I would do with Ryan Day, quite honestly. But I don't think you can blame Ohio State either way. If Ohio State got rid, well, first of all, they're not going to. Bill had the thing with AD Ross Bjork today. Now these guys always spin. They don't tell you the whole story, what they're really thinking. But it made it sound like, on one hand, you could say it was a vote of confidence. On the other hand, okay, big picture, he's our guy. Look at his record. It's really good. Program's clean. Our grades are way up there. Our grade point average, everything's good. As Bill said earlier, everything's been almost perfect except Michigan and losing to the best teams. That's so on one hand, oh yeah, of course you'd keep him. And they're going to keep him. I got to believe, this is just my opinion, they're going to keep him through the season.
Oh, there's no question about that.
I mean, there's no question. Well, I'll never say no question because we've been in this a long time and freaky things happen. But I got to believe he finishes out the season. I would not blame Ohio State if they did let him go. You can see a path and reasoning why you would let him go because of what we talked about, a one-game season, Michigan. You have to win that game. Even Gene Smith, who is a huge Ryan Day supporter, said you have to beat Michigan. Okay, so if you have to beat Michigan and you don't beat Michigan and it's goal number one, you can make the case that we got to let you go because you're coming up short on the first goal. That's that side of it. The other side of it is Jim Harbaugh was what, 0-4, 0-5?
4-5.
0-5 against Ohio State. Thought there was, Ohio State and Urban Meyer was in his head. They got to get rid of him. I think they came close. I think COVID saved him. But we don't know that for sure. And then talking to my Michigan man, I said, what changed? He said, well, he got really good assistants in there. Jesse Minter. I mean, just really good assistants, recruited a little better, and got some leaders in there, some guys who like had that dog in them. Hutchinson, some guys that kind of just by the force of their personality changed the locker room. And then it flipped. And then you throw Ryan Day on the other side, and it kind of, that made it, that greased the skids a little bit. So I can see both sides of this. I can see Ryan Day, nice knowing you, go to the NFL, become an assistant in the NFL, good luck. And I can see keeping him and just saying, all right, we believe in this guy. What I don't agree with is just sort of this idea that, well, it's got to change sometime against Michigan, and we'll figure it out. Next year, we'll get him. We've been hearing that a while now. I don't think that's how you frame this argument, whether to keep him or not, well, he'll get it fixed. I think you've got to almost remove the Michigan game from your decision-making process and say, for the good of the overall program, we're keeping him.
Well, there's the other side of this is, does Ryan Day want to stay? And that's to be determined. But, it's not just about Ryan Day. I mean, he said on his TV show, his coach's show last week, that the Michigan losses have been the hardest thing that his family's ever had to deal with. Think about that. A football game is the hardest thing that his family's ever had to deal with. And that's before this loss, obviously. So what's going on now with that? I don't know. But at a certain point, I mean, Ryan Day is a father first, a husband first. And there may be consideration there. So it may not just be Ohio State's choice. We'll see.
Well,
we'll see how it plays out.
That's fine. And if that's his choice, that's his choice. I mean, that's fine. But I'm saying from the people who do have some control of this situation in the Ohio State side, I can see a case being made.
No, I agree with you.
I don't see a case of getting rid of him tomorrow. No. And then, having an interim through the playoff, that just makes zero sense.
No, and signing day is Wednesday.
They have
signing day is Wednesday.
They have a good chance to win the playoff. They have the second best odds. There's no elite team. They are, various projections have them as an 8 or 9 seed. You'd play Oregon, presuming they win the Big Ten championship game in the Rose Bowl. There's a path that's laid out for them to win the whole thing. You have to figure out a way to regroup. They have this loaded roster. We'll see if they can win the thing.
Right.
That's where I think they need to be right now. And then there are the larger questions about what do you do with Ryan Day and does he want to be here as well and go through the agony of having to deal with Michigan all the time. That's certainly something to sort out, but we'll see how this next week play out.
Let's come back to a Joey story. We've been talking about this all year, not to get into the weeds too much, but they do have a decent shot to win it all. I said before, the Michigan a pretty good shot. To me, it comes down to, offensively, we know what the problem was against Michigan. Weird decision making on play calling, but also Will Howard. And Will Howard does not win you a national title at all. Not even close. That
offensive line.
That was the 10% bad Will Howard, or the 20%, however you want to frame it, bad Will Howard that is going to cost you. And Joey, we've been writing and saying, I've warmed to Will Howard early on. It was he doesn't check down, he doesn't see the field well, he can't throw deep, but he does everything else pretty well. I think Joey, a week or two ago, wrote, we asked, asked Day, is Will Howard good enough to take you where you need to go? Yes. The answer was yes. Okay. But the Michigan Will Howard was not. So the question comes up, under extreme pressure, and he's faced some pressure, Penn State and, other games, but under extreme pressure, is he going to make those decisions that cost you, like the picks?
I'm actually less concerned about that. That is an issue. I'm not denying it's an issue because obviously it flared up against Michigan. to me, the more intractable issue is what do you do about the offensive line? Because Will Howard can either play well or play badly. He's got it in him to play well. I don't know that this offensive line is of the caliber to play. I mean, if they play Georgia, a team like Georgia, which is just, like Michigan,
Texas.
better, Texas, that defensive line, you better forget about running the ball. You better just throw the ball all the time. I mean, is that offensive line good enough to win a national championship?
I
And
don't
the
know.
other thing is, could they possibly make some lineup changes there? I mean, I know Josh Padilla was an option at center that they did not go with. Maybe if you go with Josh Padilla at center and you move Carson Hinsman back to left guard and you go that way. Tegra Shabola has been shaky. I'll put it that way. I mean, there were times he got just beaten on Saturday. This is not a very good offensive line as it is now. Look, you lost two of your three best linemen, Seth McLaughlin and Josh Simmons, the two most important positions, left tackle and center. And your other best lineman is now playing left tackle, Donovan Jackson. He's playing out of position. And so is this line capable of doing what it needs to? Everything else on the team, I think, and again, maybe the Will Howard question remains, but everything else on the team is certainly national championship caliber. But maybe special teams now, but can you win with that offensive line? Can you win a national championship with this offensive line as constituted?
I don't see it at the moment. I mean, I think they can win a national championship, but I think it's within the realm of possibilities, and they have a better chance than a lot of teams who will make the bracket. I don't think Indiana's going to win it. I don't think.
Penn State's not winning it.
Yeah, but you're right about the offensive line. They could not push Michigan's defensive line off the ball enough. They couldn't run between the tackles. They also couldn't protect Will Howard very well in this game. Right. And normally they've been very good in pass protection, but he was under pressure on 50% of his dropbacks for PFF. And Michigan was not this blitz-happy team. A lot of times they were rushing 4. So that is the concern that I have is really the absence of Seth McLaughlin, I think, really was laid bare this game. Yeah. And that's going to be hard to win 4 games in a row without him, without Josh Simmons. Maybe they can get together for a game or two and win, but I think it's going to be hard. It's going to be a challenge. And then we sort of get back to square one. What do you do with Ryan Day and the staff, and what does Ryan Day want to do with Ohio State going forward? And here's the other thing too, is you evaluate a head coach in this climate. Being a head coach on the hot seat 10 years ago meant maybe season ticket sales are down, maybe donations to the athletic department are down. Maybe if you're trying to fundraise for facilities, that's harder to accomplish. Now you have a head coach who also needs to raise NIL money for the roster. And how does Ohio State do that if you feel like you have a head coach who's a dead man walking, for lack of a better phrase? But I think that's another complicating element. And Bill, I think you asked Ross Bjork about that last night in your story, and he sort of punted on that. It's a conversation for another day as far as the fundraising element, whether he had lost the fan base and the donor base. But before, the donor base really could only affect the program in one way. Now it helps you in talent acquisition and getting a roster together for 2025.
Yeah, I wrote this in my analysis yesterday that every team now, every program now is to some degree a house of cards because of the transfer portal. You can lose your roster. Look, Ohio State got McLaughlin and Seth Downs because Caleb Downs because Nick Saban retired. If Ohio State goes through a coaching change, who's to say who's going to leave? Does Jeremiah Smith leave? Does Caleb Downs leave again? Does all these quarterbacks stay? I mean, they're going to lose some of the quarterbacks anyway, right? That's a natural development.
Yeah.
But and signing day is in 2 days, so you have all kinds of moving pieces here. And I'm not saying the program is going to collapse or anything like that, but I'm just saying it is at a serious crossroads. It would behoove them to go on an extended playoff run and at least get a good feeling back on the program. I mean, because it's kind of a precarious thing right now.
I thought the way Ross Bjork phrased it in his comments was interesting too, because he said a playoff run. He didn't say a national championship game. That gives you some wiggle room to try to win back the fan base, because I think we remember the Georgia game in 22. They didn't win the game, but they played an inspired brand of football that made you think you think that they were a program that could get back on its feet and really go blow to blow with a national championship team. I think that matters as much as anything in the playoff. How does it look? Do they perform well in the first round? Do they win a few games? Can they go deep? I don't know if they have to win it all, but they certainly need to look like a team that can win it all. And
well, I would say this. I know what Ross Bjork said, but I think because of this first game coming up, I do think that Ryan Day's coaching for his job. What that means exactly is open to interpretation. But let's say they open at home, and Joey referenced this. Like if there's booing, what if they open at home against a South Carolina? Let's say South Carolina gets in or whatever, right? Or SMU, and they lose that game. I'm not even sure they have to lose it and look bad. They just lose it. And then you've lost to Michigan, you've lost in the first round. Now, I think that changes the narrative. I think there's a real possibility at that point that if he doesn't walk away, that he is shown the door. I am not saying I have any inside knowledge on that, but I think this first game is hugely important.
It is because
for Ryan Day.
Yeah, but you're only as good as your last game. And so if they're never going to wipe the stain of his Michigan loss off unless they win a national championship, and maybe not even then. But if they come out and play like, oh, that's the Ohio State team I know, then you can maybe say, okay, Michigan's in their heads. They laid an egg against Michigan, but this is the real Ohio State team, and we can get behind them again. I agree with you. The first game is crucial. You lose the first game, I think all bets are off. No doubt about it. You get to the semifinals. Let's say you beat Oregon in the quarterfinals. Then I think that changes the narrative again. I mean, this is so fresh because first of all, it's Michigan and all the baggage and all that stuff. But Michigan is not. It is a one game season, but it's not the only season. That's one part of this thing. And no single game ought to be worth everything.
And right, I agree. To go back what Joey said, I think there is something here. And the donors, the deep-pocketed donors, what are they saying right now?
Say his name. Say his name.
It matters. Mr. Wexner. Bill and I disagree a little bit on this. He said that's the only name that matters. I don't think when you're kind of talking the type of money that Ohio State needs for NIL and for other things, you need the W. You need to get the Wexner and others. And if they're, I don't know how that. I don't live in those circles in that world, so I don't know.
I do, Rob. I do.
I know you do. I don't know if they come up and say, get rid of him, or I'm not giving you another dime. I don't know if they're like all in. We love Ryan Day, and I don't know how that works. But you don't want to take the chance. And Ross Bjork was brought in pretty much for one reason: fundraiser. He needed to raise money, and if keeping Ryan Day is a hindrance to raising the kind of money they need to raise, there you go. Now, we haven't even talked about the other side. Maybe it's better for another podcast, but who's out there? My contention is, I'll just say this one. You cannot go with a rising star assistant. I think if you're Ohio State, because we've talked about this. The one thing that's kept Ohio State relevant for all these years is they've made excellent coaching hires who no one has ever just dropped the ball where they've just sunk. So you better bring in somebody who has been a head coach. I mean, that's one of the knocks now you're hearing about Ryan Day. He's the first Ohio State coach who never had been a head coach. You go all the way back to Bixler. Like, I don't even know if that was in the 30s or when it was, but the Bixler had not been a head coach. So I think the next guy has to be a proven head coach. Can't be some guy that's, been an offensive coordinator and really look good. You gotta take the safe guy.
Well, there's no Urban Meyer out there this year, like there was in 2011. There isn't. And so
there's one, but he's not coming back.
Who? Urban Meyer.
Nick Saban.
Oh yeah. For a long time, Luke Fickell was at the very least like the consolation prize or his star is faded with the mediocrity at Wisconsin. Mike Vrabel's a name that gets thrown out a lot. I'm telling you, there are very few NFL coaches that want to come back to the college game now. It's the other way around. And so I'm not saying Mike Vrabel would absolutely turn down the job, but that's you're talking about a very different kind of program under Mike Vrabel than you have under Ryan Day. I mean, it's a very different kind of program.
You know what, Bill? You might beat Michigan every year if you bring Vrabel, but you're going to lose like 2 or 3 or 4 other games.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, look, he's a good coach. I mean, he's proven it in the NFL, but it's a different animal.
Here's the bottom line. Whatever you do, whether Ryan Day returns next year, let's say there's a situation where he doesn't come back either due to his own volition or they fire him, it's a roll of the dice. You think back.
It is.
It is. But that's why you got to go with a guy who it's, less chance. And I know it's always a chance.
It's always. I mean, I think about Oklahoma a lot lately because there are 2 programs that are sort of talked about around college football as being recession-proof, if you will. They never have the drop-off. Oklahoma hires Brent Venables, and maybe to your point, Rob, but he was a first-time head coach, former Clemson defensive coordinator.
That was a mistake. You can't go that route.
But go 6-6 his first year, won 10 games last year, or 6-7 first year, won 10 games last year, 6-6 this year while they moved to the SEC. You inject risk into whatever you do. Although you could say it's risky to bring Ryan Day back. What kind of support does he get from the fan base and that whole question? So losing to get complicated a lot because we would not be having this discussion if they had one Saturday and were playing in the Big Ten.
No question. But that's why it was so devastating.
And I don't think that's why even the pressure to win a national championship game, I don't think would have been the same if they had beaten Michigan and at least returned and maybe even won a Big Ten title. Because then you could have said, well, we accomplished 2 out of our 3 goals and we were right there for winning a national title. I think that really the loss complicates a lot of things.
I will say one area where I think he really does have unanimous support in the locker room. I genuinely believe the players believe in him and want him to be their coach. I've never heard or even heard a hint of any current Ohio State player saying that Ryan Day is not the coach that they want to have. I mean, of course you're going to say that with a coach. You're never going to backstab your coach. But the way that they talk about him, the way like Jack Sawyer said, I'd commit to him 1,000 times over. And it's not just Jack Sawyer. I hear all the time when you do these one-on-one interviews with players for game day cover stories and things like that, and you ask about like the relationship with Ryan Day, and I can't remember anybody being anything less than effusive about
here's my question, Bill. Here's my question about that. Is that a positive or negative when it comes to Michigan? When it comes to the program?
Well, look, I'm not.
I mean, Urban Meyer struck fear into players. Players, they'd see him coming down the hallway and they'd jump into a closet so they didn't have to, So just if you there have been a lot of coaches who have failed, the players loved them and wanted to win for them. And like you said, they're always going to say that. I think they do really like Ryan Day. And some people would argue, well, that's the problem. It's like he's too nice a guy. I've always said, he's too human. Ryan Day is he's just a normal guy who has a life beyond football, seemingly. Not that he's not super competitive and doesn't want to win and is totally into X's and O's, but he just seems like he's a dude. I mean, he's a dude that you want to sit down and have a beer with or something. And is that what the program needs at the moment? I mean, it does. He was 47-0 against unranked teams. So that's pretty strong, but can't beat Michigan. So, I mean, it's a dilemma. I wouldn't want to be Ross Bjork right now.
It is. There's no question that this is like I said, a program at the crossroads, and the next, 3 weeks is the first playoff game. And then what happens after that is going to be, it's going to tell the story, because until that happens, we're just kind of in limbo.
Joey, because you're the expert on this stuff, real quickly. What's it looking like for hosting that game on the 20th or 21st? Are we have no clue, or do you have a feel for they're going to be probably in that 8-9 zone, 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 zone? You have to be top 8 to host. You have to be 8 or lower to host.
Right.
What do you think?
We'll get a better idea when the rankings come out Tuesday night. I think they're definitely going to be behind in terms of teams that they'll definitely be behind that will also likely host. I think Notre Dame is one.
Right.
The loser of the SEC title game, unless it's Georgia, I think is one to watch right now. So that's if Penn State loses to Oregon, does Penn State drop past Ohio State? So that's, I think, some of the dynamics at play. If Penn State beats Oregon, Oregon's surely going to be ahead of Ohio State. A lot of the bracket projections have Ohio State 8-9 around with Tennessee. So I think a lot of it will center around Ohio State and Tennessee. Both teams are 10-2. Both of them are done. They're going to get their resumes are going to be going up against each other. The interesting factor is, would you rather host the first round game and play Tennessee home, or would you rather go on the road and Ohio State maybe feel like it's got the world against them sort of thing? Will the crowd be any sort of benefit, or will the angstiness, I think, be hurt them? Because I can't sit here with a straight face and tell you it's for sure a home field advantage for Ohio State to be playing at the Shoe. I do think Neyland Stadium's a tough place to play, so maybe you'd rather deal with angst than having to be on a silent count and all that. But still, I don't think either situation looks super great. You'd probably rather be on a neutral field, if anything.
If I hear you right, it really comes down, or it could come down to like this Tuesday rankings. If Tennessee, whoever is ahead, Tennessee or Ohio State, is going to stay there, right?
Yeah, in terms of each other, yeah.
With each other. I mean, You're not going to jump. One's not going to. So really, it's going to really come down to like who's ahead in that, because then you're looking at 7, 8, 8, 9.
Well, but if Penn State,
no, I'm saying you're going to have
that.
All I'm saying is you're going to have Tennessee ahead of you.
If they are Tuesday, they're going to stay ahead of them. Whoever's ahead Tuesday because they don't play.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Unless, I guess,
in terms of hosting is all. I'm not talking about making the playoff. I'm talking about hosting.
Right. But I guess in theory, if like a Tennessee opponent plays somebody and they get waxed or something, that might change the perception of Tennessee. I think that's not going to happen. I think whoever's ahead Tuesday will remain ahead on Tuesday. But the big things are Oregon, Penn State. I think the SMU game, SMU Clemson will play a role in where they are. Georgia, Texas, obviously. If Georgia wins, then both those teams are ahead. If Texas smokes Georgia, for example, then I think Ohio State probably goes ahead of Georgia. So there are several games that could change it. But look, I don't think they're going to be 5, because Notre Dame will be 5, right? I mean, it's pretty clear.
Yeah, Notre Dame only has one loss.
Well, it's a terrible loss to Northern Illinois, but they're going to be 5, I would assume. So that takes Ohio State out of that slot. And then I think it's anywhere from 6 to maybe 9 is the realistic range.
There were 7 in the AP poll that came out Sunday. There were 8 in the coaches poll. SMU was ahead of them in the coaches. They were flip-flopped in the AP.
Right.
Ohio State was ahead of SMU. SMU
and if Penn State loses, then you figure Ohio State will jump Penn State. I mean, I'd be very surprised if they don't. So
I think it's interesting if it's a really close game.
Well, that's true. If it's toe-to-toe and it's 32-31 Oregon,
right.
Then honestly, I might have Ohio State over Penn State anyway. I know they have 2 losses, but they beat Penn State, and Penn State didn't play Oregon in the regular season, didn't play Indiana in the regular season.
Well, I don't know,
Penn State's
but they did make the time.
I know they're going to be. That's how it'll line up. That's my expectation what the committee was. But if I was voting in a poll, I would not rank Penn State over Ohio State. I know people like to loss count, but schedules aren't equal anymore. They're unbalanced scheduling. People are going to play different tiers of competition. So
that's fair, Joey. But I mean, we're kind of again skipping over the Michigan game, and we can say that's an anomaly and they're in their head. But if you are a neutral observer and you watched Ohio State in that game, do you think Ohio State's any good? They lost.
The defense is good, but
they lose to an unranked team and looked horrible doing it. You can say, yeah, but they look great in their other games. Well,
I mean, I think you're supposed to evaluate the body of work. You're not ranking
It's not
teams
recency
based
bias.
off how they perform Thanksgiving weekend. If it was just a Thanksgiving week rankings, Ohio State would be outside the top 25.
You know what? You're supposed to do that.
They do. Look, these are not
what happened. What happened in 2014? Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship.
Well, they were all close. Those teams were all close.
Well, yeah, there was recency bias.
Yeah, but what that committee wanted to see was how Ohio State played with Cardale Jones, because that was the unknown. But
it was also recency bias.
Well, it was 59-0, and there was some of that. But the other teams were close. I remember the debate that year, the last week before the final one, and they were saying it's paper thin difference between these teams. So
that's fine, but both those other teams, and we're talking about, crush their opponents too. It just wasn't in a Big Ten championship.
Yeah,
TCU won huge.
Right.
Anyhow, we don't need to go to that history. All I'm saying is that, who knows what the committee will do. I think if you're an Ohio State fan, you absolutely want Ohio State, and you want a home game in the first round. You want Ohio State ahead of Tennessee when the rankings come out Tuesday.
I think so too, and I know I've made my digs at Ohio State's home field advantage and all that, but I think it still beats going on the road. I think that adds to a much more challenging environment, because I think these playoff games are going to be spectacular scenes and just rabid crowds. It's going to be cranked up, much like what we saw in October at Austin Stadium. I think you're going to be playing in that type of environment. And that was hard for them. They got a bunch of false start penalties. I don't remember the exact count, but it was you could certainly count it 4 or so, somewhere in there.
You're talking about this first round especially.
Yeah.
Well, after that, then you're neutral sites. Then you're the both sites. Look, Ohio State's going to be part of history, and I'm guessing, just my guess, I'm guessing Ohio State will be the Friday night game, because they're going to want that big audience. They will. I mean, I just think that's what it's going to be.
They might, but they're going to. The other side of that, Bill, is they're going to get a big audience anyhow because it's Ohio State. So maybe you take your team that is the worst draw and put them Friday because it's the only show in town.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I don't. Maybe that's just my hunch.
Yeah. Well, do we have any other parting thoughts on either the road ahead for the Buckeyes or the?
How we got here? I would say this: as bad as Ryan Day feels, Justin Fry.
Yes.
He's probably not feeling real good right now. That would be the Ohio State offensive line coach.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, we got 3 weeks before the next game. We have plenty of time to talk about that. I mean, I don't know if we're going to podcast later this week.
We might, because we could have some playoff rankings to digest.
The playoff rankings, and we'll get signing day. Yeah, there'll probably be some stuff.
And then next week, the transfer portal opens. So it's December in college football, and eventful as always. Thanks for dropping by the Buckeye Extra Football podcast. Make sure to visit dispatch.com for the latest. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Be sure and subscribe to the Buckeye Extra podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.